Welcome to Keith Herrschafts' Midnight Cartoon Program.
It's been there all day. I don't know. No, it's not my fault. I was drawing, trying to figure out today's segments, and I turn around for 5 seconds, and I hear a splat, and when I turn back around, I look down on the floor, the cartoon's off the paper, and it's laying right there. That's not my fault. Oh. Hello, and welcome to episode number 3. We were just discussing the reality of cartoons, making them appear more realistic. And as a prime example, if you turn the camera, just point it down that way, show the thing. Yeah, that thing looks pretty real to me. Looks like a cartoon that exists in 3 dimensions. No, don't touch him. Don't toss him out. Tonight's episode, I wanted to talk about creating volume and depth in your character designs. It's one of the things that there are styles that have a flat appearance, and it's part of the design, and they work fantastically. But if you're trying to create depth in your designs, and you're not working along some sort of foundation, it can be very obvious to the viewer. So that's what we'll be covering in tonight's episode. I did want to answer one of the questions from a viewer. Let's see. Let's get the card right here. It says, how do I draw good? Well, I didn't know we had video. It's an easy answer. Practice. Hey, how's my Blob doing over there? Is he still good? Hungry? Nah, he's fine. Did it get bigger? I'm keeping it as a pet.
It smells like gasoline.
I like the smell of gasoline. I want to see what Phil thinks. What do you think, Phil? Should we keep the Blob? We got a Blob. So it's settled. While I figure out what to name my new pet, you can watch the first segment. Alright, so tonight I will be going over surface planes and how they relate to volume. A surface plane would be the visible sides of an object. So in this elongated cube shape, you have the front, the side, and the back that are visible. I generally, on a shape like this, I do a vertical line and have it wrap around the bottom, and do a horizontal line and have it wrap around the side. It gives a sense of roundness to the object. Helps replacing details later. The same principle applies on a more dynamic shape. Like this one, it's the same shape but with an L bend in it. And I still place that vertical line, but I try to imagine how the shape curves in, and I do my horizontal lines differently. It helps to lay in, helps give a better sense of the shapes you're dealing with when you're putting in folds and details like that. It's also a good example of squash and stretch, an animation principle where you have compression on one side and the other side stretches out a lot. It gives a nice sense of dynamic movement. if I was to draw a shape that was twisting, the top half maybe going clockwise, the bottom half going counterclockwise, I'll draw the left and the right side, and I think through about like where the main points are that are going to be supporting the weight, and then I draw the portion in between. So you can see I still go through the same basic steps, and I'm thinking through the object in 3 dimensions, and I place the vertical lines across it, and I'll rough in the horizontal lines, and maybe even give a vertical line down the side just to put as a note to myself, just that it's in front. You'll see, I'll do it in 1 second. Wait for it. There it is. These same principles apply when you're drawing a torso. This one's a male torso. This is a good point to talk about eye level. So you can see how I did some curves upward and some curves downward. I would place the eye level on this one just below the bottom of the rib cage, which I'll darken in a second. Objects that are above the eye level, you're looking up at them slightly and the line curves upward. If you're looking below the eye level, you look at like the pelvis. The line that wraps around the hips here is lower and it curves down. And I'm also drawing through on this sketch like before, thinking about it in 3 dimensions, trying to think about space for organs and all that stuff. And I'm also applying that principle of squash and stretch. And you can also use those surface lines to figure out shading, like I did just there. It kind of gives you a better sense of where the plane breaks and starts to turn toward the back. Now, this pose is will be like a female torso, and I've placed the rib cage in front of the hips. So you have objects obscuring other objects, but I'll still follow that same idea and try to draw in 3 dimensions. And I place that surface guideline in the same way that I do, but I'm thinking almost as if, as I'm drawing lighter, the image is going into the distance. So you really want to try and imagine the shape as 3 dimensions, almost as if you're sculpting into the paper more than you are drawing on the surface of it. And like all the drawings before, I start light and I work to dark. It gives you multiple opportunities to adjust and correct for errors that you made. Like I said, I do a lot of my thinking on the paper. Those surface lines, I love the sense of depth they give, and how you can see this one, it goes down, and then I have it almost curving back, and I'm imagining my pencil, my line going into the paper. And you can do the same thing, add and use those places where the plane breaks and starts to turn to give you a better sense of where to add shadow. I've also added a bit of twist to this pose. Here's a more exaggerated version of it to give you a sense of how I have the torso angling down toward us and the hips moving away from us, more down toward the ground. And again, it's a different version of squash and stretch, but it's still there. It's applied in a more subtle way that kind of leads the eye around that shape. But you have the same idea that the shape is curving around, and those surface lines really help to establish a sense of direction. So I hope you found those notes helpful, and look for those same ideas as I proceed with tonight's demo drawing. So this one's going to be much more complex. It's going to be working toward a finished drawing, but you see I still go through all the stages that I've mentioned in previous videos. You can see right now I'm in the gesture layout stage. It's not the most loose gesture because I'm doing a lot of planning. This character kind of was a bit more challenging because I had the character positioned on like a hover bike kind of thing. This is a character from one of my mini comics she is a musician in some, post-apocalyptic cyberpunk dystopia, and she has the dinosaur costume to throw people off, so they don't realize that she's just a retail class life form, and she's able to keep her job as a musician. But you see, I move through the various stages and try to spread the attention around the page. You don't want to focus too much in one area before you sort out the details in another. This would also be a good time to mention what I was starting to mention before about folds. When you notice, especially the folds on the right arm there, and the left arm, and actually on the point where the tail breaks off at the end, you'll notice I think about the folds all the way around. I think about them almost as a tubular shape wrapping around the surface of the object, because it's fabric bunching up and collapsing in on itself. So a lot of times I try to think of a fold as like a half a tube, and try to give that volume. You're not drawing the entire thing. You don't want to draw every fold on a piece of fabric, at least not for the style that I work in. There are some people who do much more complex work with folds and fabric, but for cartoons, sometimes you want to go with a very simple language, but even when you use those simple designs, you want them to work off of like real life physics. It makes cartoons more believable. You're trying to do a lot with just a few lines. And as I work my way around this too, you just pay attention to how I kind of loosely rough in a shape with a light touch and then go back in over it. Like I said before, and I've said it multiple times, I do a lot of my thinking on the paper. And I think that's important for the way I draw, at least. And try not to pay attention to how I forgot to draw the other handlebar in the on that motorbike. But before you notice that, I'm going to end this segment. Well, that's all for tonight's episode. One last thing to mention. I mentioned it earlier, but I feel it's something I should mention again and stress. When you're trying to bring reality to a cartoon character, think of them in 3 dimensions. In a drawing, you're working in up, down, left, and right. That's it. So when you, as you're learning to draw, you have to start learning to see things incorrectly in a certain way. Because when I'm drawing, I see things as though they're receding into the paper too. And you have to really strengthen the ability of your imagination to really think about depth when you're working in a 2-dimensional medium. It's one of the most important things that I think I've developed over the course of learning how to do this. It takes a while, and you'll see it pay off as you get better at it. But that's all for tonight's episode. Thanks for tuning in again. That's 3 weeks in a row. So hopefully I'll be here. Should be here next week. So I'll see you Saturday night. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff. And I'll put a link for my comic down in the description if you want to take a look at that. But thanks for joining us again, and I'll talk to you in the comments section.